Good afternoon and welcome to this GNF session on opening of Indian space sector, the global perspective. I'm Pawan Goenka. I'm the chairperson for a newly formed office by Government of India called In Space, and I'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes. You're well aware that India has a very rich and old history in the space activities, going back to about 60 years, with a very modest beginning to being one of the major spacefaring nations. The work so far has been mostly done by ISRO, with private industry generally performing the role of being a supplier or a vendor to ISRO. We have currently three launch vehicles, the GSLV Mark III, GSLV, and the PSLV. And I'm sure most of you are generally familiar with these. PSLV is a workhorse with about 55 launches that have already happened. GSLV Mark III is the largest vehicle with maybe about 5 launches that has happened on that vehicle. We have multiple satellites in orbit. If you go to our exhibition, you will see all the satellites listed, perhaps of the order of 50 in communication, navigation, and Earth observation. Very strong relationship ISRO has with all the space agencies around the world. A lot of cooperation happening with the space agencies at various levels for scientific missions and otherwise. But this is what I would call Indian Space 1.0. What we're moving into now is Indian Space 2.0. Of course, these days everybody talks 4.0, we are still at 2.0. And major reforms announced by Government of India just about 2 to 3 years ago to bring in private sector in a big way to play a major role in the way the space sector would grow in India. A transition that I think many other spacefaring nations have already done, and India is just about starting that transition. And I noticed that being here in IAC, and my background is not in space industry, I'm from automotive industry. Space is very new to me. This is my first IAC conference. And what I noticed is that almost every country in the world is looking at space, whether big country, small country, developing nation, emerging economy, looking at space in a very big way and want to do well in space and use space as a way to grow the economy. Fortunately, I think there is enough space for everyone. And the only way to win in this space opportunity is to create collaboration between companies across the world, between various countries. And that's the primary focus that we have of the GNF today, to look at the global perspective of opening up of the Indian space sector. We have a distinguished panel here. I will introduce them later. But I just want to start off with a small presentation to put in perspective what is happening in India in terms of opening up of the space sector. May I have the first slide, please? Okay, I cannot. Okay. So the reforms that were announced, and I see many familiar faces here, so for many of you it will be a repetition. So excuse me for that, but there are several people who may be seeing it for the first time. One of the first things that happened about 3 years ago was establishment of NSIL, New Space India Limited, and the CMD chairman, managing director is sitting right here. Can you stand up and wave? So this is the commercial arm of ISRO. This was set up in March 19. And all the activities that private sector would like to do, or even government entities, will go through NSIL. And NSIL currently is using all the ISRO facilities, ISRO satellites, ISRO launch vehicles, but soon they will start doing their own development and take over a lot of facilities from ISRO to provide commercial services to whoever the customer might be. The second thing that happened was creation of In Space that was announced in June 2020. And the primary objective here was to drive participation of private sector in space. And I'll talk more about In Space in the subsequent slide. The Indian Space Policy 2022 is in the final stages of development. Many of you have asked me when. I cannot quite answer when, but it's very close. And this space policy will replace a policy that was launched 20 years ago, which was very restrictive and not really aimed at private sector to participate in space activities. The new policy will remove almost all the roadblocks that private sector has in participating in Indian space. and not just Indian companies, but companies from outside India by establishing an arm in India. Other major constraint that we have today is the FDI policy, that is foreign direct investment into India. It's very difficult for foreign investments to come into India today as per existing policy, but the new FDI policy that we are working on will make it a lot easier for foreign investment to come into India. And then there is a Space Activities Bill, which is the law that will get passed, but that will be the fifth activity that will happen, and that kind of completes the reform that Government of India has put in place. In space, as I said earlier, and this is what I chair, it has a dual role, a role of authorizer, that is all private sector activities will be authorized by InSpace to ensure that there are no compromise on safety, security, or international obligations that India may have. Also play a role of promoter in terms of identifying the areas where private sector can get in, hand-holding them, enabling them by providing access to ISRO facilities, ISRO infrastructure, ISRO expertise, and also creating its own expertise with time to be able to give direct hand-holding inputs and technical advice to private sector. And also to supervise the activities, because in many cases, private sector companies are new emerging companies, and they may require some help in terms of completing their project successfully. So these are details of what promoter, enabler, authorizer, and supervisor means, but I won't go into too much of detail of that. I think the words themselves describe what these roles might be. One very important thing, and those of you who may have worked from outside India into India, is there are always multiple departments to deal with for any private sector person. That's probably true for almost any country, not just for India. And one of the big roles for InSpace is to become a single window contact for the industry, whether it is access to ISRO facilities for testing and support, whether it is technology transfer from ISRO, whether it is interdepartmental coordination within the government with Ministry of Information Broadcasting, Department of Telecommunication, DPIIT, authorization of project, and also capacity building in terms of technical center and creating infrastructure with the help of ISRO for use by industry. So in summary, we basically have three arms that will help the private sector to play a very important strategic role in space, which is ISRO, of course, with all its might that they have with 17,000 people, about 10 to 12 different centers in India, and then NSIL, which I talked about, and InSpace. So that just sort of gives an overview of how the changes are coming in terms of opening up the space industry in India, and what we will talk about mostly today is global perspective. And I said earlier that we have a distinguished panel here. I will introduce them now, one by one. And I have requested the panel to make 5 to 7 minutes of remarks so that we have about 15 minutes left in the end for any question and answers that you may have. So I'll start with Dr. Scott Pace. Dr. Scott Pace is a veteran of space industry. I met him for the first time, and he seems to have done almost everything in space. Currently, he's a professor of practice of international affairs, director of the Space Policy Institute, director of the Institute for International Science and Technology Policy, and director of the MA International Science and Technology Policy program at the George Washington University. Dr. Pace was deputy assistant to the president and executive secretary of the National Space Council from 17 to 20. He previously served as the associate administrator for program analysis and evaluation at NASA from 2005 to 2008, and deputy chief of staff for the NASA administrator from 2002 to 2003. So Dr. Pace, if you could make your remarks. I have requested the panel to talk about what is their view on where the space economy will go, which are the areas that India can participate in, and what does India need to do to engage with the global players around the world. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And it's an honor to be on this panel, and I think talking about some of the most important questions in the increasing globalization and democratization of space, which is what makes the current space age different from the Cold War and even previous, only a few decades ago. So if you want to see an example of globalization and democratization, just go to the exhibit hall and wander back and forth, and you can see what I mean. A little bit more than 20 years ago, India engaged in substantial economic reforms that led to amazing growth of the Indian economy and really the transformation of India, which today we know of as both an IT sector, a technology sector, biopharmaceuticals, and so forth. More personally, in the space-related area, in 2008, the Chandrayaan-1 mission to the moon discovered water or signs of excess hydrogen on the South Pole, which of course transformed thinking about the moon and about what we could do next. Certainly prior to that time, the assumption that the moon was dry really limited some of the things that we could think about. With the revelation of water on the South Pole, certainly our horizons expanded. India, of course, has also been a major launch provider. So a number of companies you probably know, like Planet, and launching large numbers of microsatellites have been done through PSLV launchers. In the last 2 years, the kinds of economic reforms that transformed the Indian economy decades ago are starting to transform the space sector. In particular, some of the transformation represented by our panel chair today have important promises for India, not just in traditional areas such as launch vehicles and satellites, but also more importantly in telecom and IT, which is really where the money is. I have many countries who come ask me about making money making launch vehicles, and I say, please don't. There is little money to be made in launch vehicles. One can do so, it's important. Obviously, we think it's important for autonomy and so forth. But if you look at where the money is in services, and then maybe in satellites, and then maybe in launch. But it's a tough business. And in the area of information technologies, I think, of course, India has a strong amount of promise, and the kinds of economic reforms being discussed today, and we'll see how they're implemented, we'll hopefully see that promise come to fruition. My own involvement and awareness of India has come mostly through GPS, satellite navigation, remote sensing kinds of systems. I think there's much promise to be done, particularly as mentioned with some of the foreign direct investment liberalization that occurred last year in October of 21, and we'll hope to see more progress. Now, I don't want to paint a completely rosy picture. That would maybe be too boring. But I would also point out that there are a couple of things that are still, if you will, on the to-do list. One of them, particularly, is remaining domestic barriers. As you might be no surprise, the U.S. advocates an open skies policy that lets consumers make their own connections with satellite service providers rather than going through a single national authority. We also have concerns about the high licensing fees that are involved. We'd like to see more allowance for foreign satellite phone systems, and we're concerned about the length of time that it takes to get licenses and authorizations, some of which these problems are still in the U.S. In terms of data analytics, again, I say one of the more promising areas, there are a number of weighty problems that are not strictly limited to space, such as data localization problems and remote access controls, which have been debated in other forums about limiting the growth of the IT sector in India. Finally, let me close by saying that if you look across the range of U.S.-Indian cooperation, we have strong cooperation in the security side that's growing, particularly through the Quad with Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. So things like space domain awareness, maritime domain awareness, the use of space systems to improve security awareness in the region has been growing. We have, of course, a long history in civil space cooperation, as noted, and hope to see more. And in the commercial cooperation, the reforms that are being undertaken right now, we hope they accelerate in order to deepen those strengthened ties between the U.S. and India. In this regard, I hope that at some future point, this is not an official announcement, but at some future point, we can look toward a comprehensive dialogue with India on civil, military, and commercial space activities, the way we have with Japan for many years, the way we are currently engaged in with France, and I hope we can look forward to that with India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pace. There is a way to ask question. Will somebody help the audience to know how to ask question? Anyone here? Everybody is aware of how to ask question, then it's okay. We'll now move on to Mr. Enrico Palermo. He has been leading the Australian Space Agency since January 2021. And since his commencement as the head of Australian Space Agency, he has overseen a number of major milestones. Under his leadership, the agency has reached an agreement with NASA, a very important agreement, for an Australian designed, built, and operated rover to be included in the future mission to the moon. A Perth native, Enrico graduated from the University of Western Australia with a Bachelor of Engineering in Mechanical Engineering and Bachelor of Science in Physics and Applied Mathematics. He's also studied at the International Space University in Strasbourg. He is passionately applying his deep technical background, international network, and experience in scaling business to rocket Australia's space sector towards the agency's goal of tripling its size to $12 billion and creating 20,000 new jobs by 2030. Enrico has a special interest in India. He has visited India a couple of times. We met him last month, and he brought a very large delegation with him from Australia, and is trying to create a sort of relationship between Indian companies and Australian companies. Enrico?
That's good. Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel with the esteemed colleagues. I think I can share a unique perspective as we talk about this theme of India's space sector and its opening up, in drawing parallels to how we're building the space sector in Australia. So we in Australia have a long-term heritage in space. We were one of the first nations to build and launch a satellite into space. We've used Earth observation data for decades to improve our primary industries. We've been a long-term partner in deep space exploration, and our First Nations people have used the stars for tens of thousands of years to dictate seasonal activities. So like India, we have a proud heritage in space, but it wasn't until sort of 2017 when we announced the formation of the Australian Space Agency that we really were ready to take that next step. And in many respects, the foundation of NSIL and InSpace draws a lot of parallels with the Australian Space Agency. Our purpose is to grow a globally respected, thriving and responsible sector in Australia, space sector in Australia that lifts the economy and inspires and improves the lives of all Australians by using space technology, by using space data. So as an agency, it's been in our DNA since day one to drive ecosystem to growth along the lines of what Chairman Goenka presented with respect to InSpace. In our civil strategy, international collaboration is a core pillar, and India is identified as a key country partner. And in terms of addressing the points the Chairman asked to address, if I talk to the India example, we have a comprehensive strategic partnership between Australia and India. This is the highest level government-to-government strategic partnership we have in Australia. And earlier this year, our former Prime Minister Morrison and Prime Minister Modi announced the next step, building off our Memorandum of Understanding, launching a new initiative called the India Space Initiative. Fast forward, Australia was very proud last month, as the Chairman shared, to be the main country partner at the Bengaluru Space Expo, where I was very thrilled and proud to lead our biggest ever space delegation to Australia. We had 20 organisations and over 40 professionals that travelled to the Congress, and it was a tremendous success. Our Indian counterparts at ISRO and InSpace were very welcoming. There's incredible capability clearly in India from its programs. We saw 7 memorandums of understanding signed between Australian and Indian companies. We also saw the first Australian company launch its first operations in India. And that's on the backdrop of also government-to-government interactions, and we're honoured to have the opportunity to support ISRO and the Indian government on the inspirational Gaganyaan mission. So the reason I raise all that is space is an international business, whether it's growing the Indian space ecosystem, which is a theme of this topic, or growing our ecosystems in Australia. Having those partnerships, having mechanisms such as the India Space Initiative to connect companies, having bilateral relationships that allow interoperability. So as we both develop our respective launch sectors, what are their opportunities to harmonise regulations, for example, both on Earth and in space? And we continue to obviously do that through various mechanisms with mechanisms such as UN COPIUS. So there's a variety of things I think that come together in order to help an ecosystem develop, whether it's India or Australia, and we're very proud to be a partner with India on I think, a shared journey. Thank you.
So thank you, Enrico. The whole week I have been talking about the model that Australia and India has started for private sector collaboration. And now we have a long list of countries that we need to do this with. I think we are booked for the next 1 year. I now come to Mr. Stefan Westphal. He joined Airbus Defence and Space in 1998. I think it was called something else at that time. He has been holding various senior leadership positions there. And currently, he is Senior Vice President for Sales and Marketing. He started his career in UK and then in France on telecommunication satellite. In 2005, and I was surprised to read this, he initiated cooperation with ISRO and actually moved to India. I don't know for how long you were in India. 4 years? Okay. He moved to India for 4 years and led the first joint project. And he liked Asia so much that he spent the next 10 years in various Asian countries before coming back to his home country. In November 2020, he was appointed SVP. That is his current position. Any questions, Stefan?
Thank you very much. I think that here I'm going to give a little bit of an industry perspective on this panel. And also going back to the long collaboration that we've got with ISRO, and indeed it was quite a privilege to have the opportunity to spend 4 years of my life in Bangalore. I can tell you, and I see quite a few friends here in the room, this really shaped my life and my family as well. Our history and our collaboration with ISRO indeed goes back to the early 2000s. We built telecommunication satellites together. We also launched our own Earth observation satellites on PSLV, and we are looking forward as well to the launch of OneWeb satellites next month also on the GSLV. So since the beginning of these times, we have been talking about the involvement of the private sector. But what has been absolutely amazing, and I could experience it myself again when I was able, after COVID, to travel again back to Bangalore, is to see how much it is happening at the moment. I mean, the way that, first of all, with InSpace and with NCL to see how the landscape is getting reorganized, but also the way that private industry itself is investing, self-investing, showing all the interest that they've got and the aspiration that they've got for the space industry. I mean, it was really touching the heart to really see that this is really happening and this is really in motion. When you look at the global space sector today, on one hand, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, you know that space is absolutely everywhere in all domains. I mean, in telecommunication, in Earth observation, security, be it for security, being for Earth monitoring, climate change. Also now, this amazing new domain for private industry as well, which is space exploration. I mean, building a business case for a space station or building a business case on how to build an ecosystem on the moon, I would say it's an experience of itself. What is a new challenge for the industry, and where we are also welcoming and where we need new players to come on board, is that, and it's very hard for the what some people call the big primes to say it, we can't do it all ourselves. We can't be everywhere. We can't invest on everything, and we have to focus our resources. We need to develop partnerships. We also have a very new significant change in our space sector at the moment with the business of the constellation. It's the topic of mass production, volume. We were not used to that. We were doing tailor-made solutions. Now we do things in volume. Even when for space exploration, I mean, we build the service module for Artemis, for the Orion capsule. This one, we already have several models in production at the moment. It's really a production in series, and of course, we've got the constellation projects. So when we look at the different dimensions in which industry needs to play, first of all, our satellites are not anymore isolated piece of hardware in the sky. They are all part of an integrated system. And we see that to manage this integration, the level of software development, either for our customers to process the information that we are generating, or even to enable them to use our solutions. I mean, when we build a flexible satellite, we need to provide all the algorithms so that you are able to operate and get the best out of it. The level of digitalization, which is getting there without talking about digitalization in production, is definitely a key area which is under significant growth and where we need industry to grow. Another point which is extremely important in our business is supply chain. And I think that all our agencies are always focusing on R&D, developing technologies, but what we need also is strong or robust supply chain. We have experienced that also through COVID. I mean, you know, on a satellite, if one equipment is missing, it just stays on the ground. I would say even if one screw is missing. Sometimes we even have to support financially companies which are getting into financial difficulties, going through a crisis like COVID, or having to reconfigure following the war in Ukraine. So making sure that at the same time as we invest in the technology, we invest in a robust supply chain is absolutely key and essential. And of course, along with the supply chain goes the topic of the quality systems to be aligned on the international standards, which are a bit special to space, as you know. They are not exactly the same. So really seen from an industry perspective, that's really the focus where I would say we would be looking at. And we are definitely looking forward to work with the private industry and all the investment which is ongoing in the country at the moment. I also think that the best way to initiate these partnerships are indeed through national programs. I mean, the country has immense needs to serve, where the regulatory aspects are being organized. And I think that this provides also a huge opportunity to position and to develop these partnerships, to initiate these programs, which for sure will find also their expansion on the global market. Thank you very much.
Finally, I would like to introduce Dr. S. Somnath. Dr. Somnath is the chief of Indian Space Agency, as chairman of ISRO. He started his career 37 years ago at ISRO, and has been involved in almost all the launch vehicle, that's his specialization, programs. In PSLV, he was director for Mark III program. Currently, he is chairman of ISRO, also secretary of Department of Space, which is the one body under the government that unifies everything under space, and also chairman of what is called Space Commission, which is the highest decision-making body for everything to do with space. Dr. Somnath.
Thank you, Dr. Goenka, and also the panelists here. And first of all, let me thank each one of you for joining this GNF session, having great interest in the space activities in India, and also to join the movement that Dr. Goenka is leading to bring space activities in India to global scales. I don't want to talk much about space because already been talked about. What I would like to tell you is that about India. This year we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of our independence, and our government, our Honorable Prime Minister has laid down a vision for the next 25 years when we celebrate our 100th anniversary of our independence and where we need to be and what we should be as a nation. As possibly all of you know that India is a country where we don't believe in aggression, we believe in cooperation. And we believe in developing strength in this nation through the power of technology for the benefit of the people and benefit of the whole of the universe. And this is our philosophy. So you look at space sector, when we started in 60s, this whole activity, we even look at the independence time when we were just 35 crore people. I don't know, the unit of measurement, crore, may not be very here used. But today we are 135 crore people. We had poverty at that time. Today, even with 5 times the increase of population, we are still able to survive and keep our nation very enthusiastic and active. During the last COVID season, we didn't see any meltdown in this country. In fact, the post-COVID season, we saw the emergence of the economic sector and with sufficient growth rate in this country. We are one of the leading IT service provider today. And probably you may not even know that the COVID time, the vaccination drive that we did in this country is phenomenal in terms of the number of units of COVID vaccination that we could give to our people. And each and every one, at least 3 doses of COVID vaccination, it was such a mammoth movement. So it all shows the prowess and the power of the country. And we would like to tell you that when we started the space program in our country way back in 60s, it was a difficult time when we started the whole program because that time the institutional system was not there available, the financial situation of the country was so weak, but the vision was there. The vision was to create the so much controlled regime of space cannot be denied to our nation. And it was that desire made this work to happen at that time. And we created that over the last 60 years, certain capability in launch vehicles, satellites, applications, etc. over the years. And all of you know that space has been very restrictive. And it has changed in the last few years. And this change is not only in India, but across the globe, everywhere. It is no longer controlled by the institutional framework or the governmental system, but it is more open now. It is available to everybody. It is available to industries, startups, industries who wish to develop their own systems without government control. And they want to available to open up to sectors where applications can drive all these technologies. And this is a great change. And the ambition of the nation, our India, is to go digital. I think this is a very important movement that the government is driving today. Everything digital. The services that the government can give to the public, the financial transactions, the citizen identity, the communication, the services in various sectors, resource mapping and planning, all of this will be digital. And this digital economy, we see that the space sector is going to be one of the important elements. So it only says that the growth in this sector is guaranteed because of the vision of the government. And for this, we need each one of you. We need not only the Indian Space Research Organization, which has established certain capability in the country by developing systems, working with industries as at least suppliers and manufacturers, but we want them to grow to the next level and take the need from the community and develop systems for them and offer it to the nation because the nation is a huge market. I think probably you may not know that the 80% of the country still lives in villages. And only 20% knows the cities and maybe accessing much of those services. And there is a huge market to be developed. I am too from a village where you wouldn't have thought about even electricity and communication was not available. I had an opportunity to learn and study and became the chairman of the Space Commission. It shows the aspiration of the nation to extend its arms to everybody and grow in various sectors. That means there is a huge market which is ready to be served. Not only for this technology, much more. The communication network that we need to grow in the country is phenomenal, and it's yet to grow. And there is a market for it. So it shows that thousands of satellites are to be built. We just have only 50 there. And also we need to have launch frequencies much faster than that we have currently doing. We also need to have applications for various sectors that can be delivered much more faster than we do today. So it opens up new avenues for everybody to come and contribute. And it is not the market of India that we are looking at, the global market. Can we use the frugal way of Indian technology to change the way we look at the space market? We did a mission to Mars with such a low cost. All of you know about the story. Why don't we replicate such stories in various other domains of space? Building satellites, launching them, providing services for the global community. And this is the transition that we are making by the announcement of the InSpace. And we would like to offer it to every startup, every industry who wish to come and work in India to create the next level in various areas. It can be in the applications, it can be the downstream side of work, it can also be the upstream of technology development, satellite building, and launch vehicle building as well. All these are open now. The regulatory framework in which we have been talking, almost controlled regime, is not now gone. I think we are open to discussion as everywhere it is happening. And this opening up is what is reflected today in the comments that you have given here. Thank you so much and wish all the very best for this.
Thank you, panelists. I was hoping for 15 minutes of time for Q&A, and we have 15 minutes, 33 seconds, so we have done quite well. So before I go to questions from the audience, and most of the questions here are going to be coming to Mr. Somnath, so you'll have to be prepared for it. Please ask questions to other panelists also. But before I go to the questions here, let me pose one question to all the panelists. Very specific, pointed answer I'm looking for. What is one strength that India has to be able to play in the global, or have a bigger play in the global space arena? And what is one thing that the government needs to do to make it happen? Okay.
If I may jump in, yes. I think that one key strength that India has is definitely the passion and I would say the reservoir of young engineers. I mean, when I see the numbers of engineers who want to go to the space business, it's absolutely amazing. In terms of regulation, I don't have that too many comments to make myself, I think, on that topic. Where I would really come, it's on the fact of supporting really the industry to grow and to also to grow and be, I would say, robust to face all the ramp-up and the scale-up capability that the industry needs to deliver on all its programs.
Thank you.
You took my answer. I mean, I had the privilege to visit a few startups in Bengaluru and Hyderabad and New Delhi, and yeah, the energy, the passion, the big, you know, thinking big and dreaming big, that energy I think is incredible talent, and then they can draw down the long-term expertise of the government sector. I think it's a huge opportunity.
Thank you. Dr. Pace?
Well, I think I'll echo some of the other comments, in particular the talent base that's there, particularly in IT and analytics, you know, is world-class. The point made, though, earlier about the manufacturing production line, though, I think this is going to be an area of challenge for India, but I think that this is something they can probably step up to in terms of manufacturing quality and things at a high rate. Another area I think of advantage, of course, is the large domestic market there, which is, of course, very attractive to telecom and other data service providers. And the primary challenge there, of course, is lingering bureaucracy, which is not quite in the same spirit of the reforms that have already been underway. So that's why I think what you described as the changes that are happening in India now are, I think, very, very optimistic. And I think the thing that industry can do is to work to actually implement those intentions at the very detailed tactical level that industry needs.
Thank you. Somnath?
I believe the real strength is the people, especially the ones who are well educated now and available as the capable hands to take high-tech areas, the complex engineering problems, solutions, etc. I think banking on them, we can grow on.
Thank you. So I'll go through questions, and this is really made very easy. It also tells me which order I'm supposed to ask the questions. Some of the questions are not relevant to the topic that is being discussed here, so I may skip some questions. But the first question to Somnath is, does India plan to sign the Artemis Accord? And a related question is, how do upcoming space agencies like India and Australia look at resource utilization on the moon during the Artemis mission? Any fears on missing out?
So let us understand what the Artemis Accord means and what it means to us. I think unless we put these views in perspective, there is no answer yes or no for this. The whole point today is India has made certain accomplishments on moon. We have had 2 missions. The first mission, we also had an impact probe. The second one, we have made an attempted lander. The lander is still on the surface. We have a program to go further to demonstrate the landing and also explore, understand moon. Okay, all these are really, really there. The vision of the US in terms of the Artemis is of a different nature. I think the meeting point between these views and visions is something called an accord. You know, we need to find that common point where we find that both those vision has a common goal and where we can meet each other. This discussion and dialogue is still on. And I think unless we reach that point where we agreed for mutual benefit, there is no point in talking about an accord. I think that is a level we are. We are currently trying to understand each other. The Artemis program is under development in the US, and we are also under development of Chandrayaan-3 programs and further program exploration. Let us move a little more further. Then we will talk about meeting and signing some accords.
Enrico, there's a question for you also in that.
Yeah, so Australia, I think as many in the audience know, we were one of the founding signatory of the Artemis Accords, the first date, and unique in that perspective because we're also a signatory to the Moon Treaty. And I think maybe one of, or still the only that could be wrong, that have signed both. So we look at the Artemis Accords as a practical way as we step to develop a permanent presence on the moon. We need to start to build, with international partners, a practical set of guidelines. We'll have a test case. As it was mentioned in the introduction, we are developing a rover that will go to the moon as soon as 26, 27, and it's going to pick up regolith, and it's going to take it to a NASA plant, which will do scientific research to see if you can extract oxygen. And so the rover is our boldest step yet as a nation. It's the first time we've done an interplanetary rover, but that boldest step is also starting to understand the practical implementation of Artemis, our obligations under the Moon Treaty. So it's a really test case of all of that.
Thank you. You want to say something on this?
Yeah, I'd like to just reiterate, I think correctly characterize the beginning. The Artemis Accords are an open invitation. There's no particular time schedule. Obviously, we welcome as many countries who want to sign as they see it, in their interest to do so. I think that the Artemis Accords are a good basis, and the principles are a good basis for starting conversations over very practical issues. Again, as mentioned about the resources, there's a lot of science to be done before we can exploit resources. Characterization of lunar ice, what kind of form it's in, so forth. But I think as we do more operations in and around the moon, the central theme is going to be communication. Communication, communication, communication. Where are the objects that are there? Are we making sure we're putting them away? Are we notifying each other of what's going on? I mean, I think really the common theme under the Artemis Accords really is open and consistent communications between all parties, which I think we can all probably see the benefit of, and that India has taken a strong role in participating in the long-term sustainability of space activity discussions at the UN, and in that, the sustainability of the space environment that we all worry about, of course, overhead, also extends out to the moon. As we have more microsatellites and more rovers and so forth operating around the moon, communicating exactly where they are, what happens with them at the end of life. This is a subject where I think there'll be an intense dialogue of all of us operating around the moon, whether we've signed the Artemis Accords or not.
Thank you. Question is, Mr. Pace mentioned that we want to focus more on service industries than launch services. How can India promote a service industry that can utilize PSLV? Who would like to take that? How can India promote a service industry that can utilize PSLV? Somnath? Yes? Anyone?
Well, I'll defer to the real industry people. I mean, I'm a professor, so my opinion may be worth less. I'll just take a stab and say that things which are good for the growth of the IT sector in India, including overcoming barriers and issues like data localization, remote access, forming cloud storage systems. These things are all things that will be good for space, which is, I think, again, as I've stressed, where the money is, and we'll take advantage of the incredible human talent, in India, and see its full realization. If you look at a lot of new entrepreneurial startups and so forth in the U.S., you find they're strongly oriented around data and data analytics of all kinds of different forms: geospatial data, remote sensing data, space situational awareness data, and these, to me, are areas of natural strengths for India as the regulatory environment evolves.
Thank you. Let me also try and answer that question, and then I'll request Somnath. See, the new space policy is going to make the data that ISRO has, almost all the data, not 100%, but almost all of the data that ISRO has, available to anyone who needs it or wants to use it. And more data will get generated, and therefore those companies that want to get into services and get into database services can utilize the data and provide the services. Somnath, you want to add anything?
No, I believe the question is more on how we can use PSLV for applications.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I believe that is already there. It's already happening. I think PSLV is just a rocket. It can only launch satellites, nothing more. No, we look at applications from satellite-driven applications. One of them, just now Dr. Goenka mentioned, is the imaging services from the Earth observation system. We have also done some of the launches of the navigation satellites, which we have done. Today, we look at PSLV as a very important launch service provider, rocket, and we would like to bring it to the commercial domain and make it available in numbers. And the number of launches that are happening now are only 5 or 6 in a year. The goal is to increase it further. And then, so that the customer which you want to use the satellites could actually afford and make it available much more frequently. I think this is a goal. And recently we have announced that the PSLV is moving to industry, and they will be producing it based on the market demand, and they will be allowed to manufacture in more in numbers and launch it on their own. And this is what we would like to do with the PSLV.
So Somnath, I'm sure you get this question often. How does one get a job at ISRO?
It's very simple. Yeah. First, be inspired by the space. Be very passionate about space. Keep that vision in your mind, and write the ISRO examination. And it's actually an open examination we conduct in India. Almost 1.5 lakh people write whenever we announce for 100 seats, and it's a very competitive one. And if you select one, you are there in ISRO. And there are other means of entry. And if you are a postgraduate or a postdoctoral fellow, there are other modes of entry into ISRO at various levels. And we scout at least 250 people in a year, engineers. And there are other jobs, of course, available. And I believe that's going to increase in the next 1 year. We will be seeing much more recruitment taking place. Wait for it.
Next question is, which I'll try and answer. Does India plan to have a similar regulatory framework for licensing commercial space launches like the US, UK, and other countries? The answer is yes. That's what the new policy will do. And in fact, one of the advantages of being late in releasing policy is that we are able to read all these policies and ensure that we come out with a policy that is best of all. Next, what are the lessons the Indian space ecosystem can take from Australia, US, and EU? What are the lessons that these countries can learn from India? So maybe, Somnath, you can answer first on what are the lessons. Okay.
Is it a lesson that you learned from India? Then it must be...
Go ahead. Either, both of you.
In terms of, I mean, we're early in our journey. So, and I think as we built our civil space strategy, as I said before, we identified that international collaboration is the only way to build an effective ecosystem. And I think, India understands that and is incorporating that into their plans. I think reflecting on what's happened in Australia, as I said, we had a great start. We were the fourth nation to launch a satellite into space, and for whatever reason, geopolitical others, we stopped. And so I think it's important in any ecosystem to have the perseverance, to have the long-term stay on power, to have international partners which drive resilience, long-term in funding and efforts. And so I circle back to the strength and the importance of those international partnerships, which I think India understands in terms of moving forward.
Thank you.
If I may, just one comment, because that rings a bell on one key topic. And it goes back to the classic debate that we've got between old space and new space, I would say. And what we are really looking at Airbus is what we call next space, which means that to address what's next in space, it's this very close relationship that you need to have between the startups and between, I would say, the established player. Because where we have a great combinations, it's because the startups are going there where we cannot really go, or where we don't want to go because we have other priorities, or because we are not organized to address it. On the other hand, the startups also, when they want to serve customers, when they need in space, you need to make sure that you are there for the next 15 years. You need to make sure that you have a guaranteed SLA, I would say, level of service service of level agreement. And frankly, the collaboration that we've got between the startup and the established players like us is the biggest lessons learned that we got on the past years. And I think it's also a great model and a huge model that we need to replicate in India as well.
Okay, so final question also goes to you. Where is it? No. Is Airbus planning to expand, and this is not a planted question, is Airbus planning to expand satellite design, analysis, manufacturing in India?
Okay, and actually the way that we are working at the moment is really to develop partnerships, and we do have developed MOUs as well within Indian industry. I mean, as I mentioned a couple of months back, we were in India with Anand Technology. We inaugurated their new space center. I think that we have great partners there, and our plan is really to build on these partners. On our military aircraft business, we are also pioneering on the Make in India, on how we develop and work with Indian industry to work together. It's really our model, and we really want to maintain it and to keep developing it.
Thank you very much. We couldn't take all the questions. Maybe outside some of the panelists can be there and you can ask them questions. I would like to wrap up this session because we are over time. First of all, thank you, panelists, for very good insights into how India can sort of move up in the global participation in space. And thank you, audience, for the questions and for your presence here. Thank you, everyone.